Hello everyone, my name's Daniel and I'm a programmer and an artist. About a week ago I put out an update for my geometry node assets, and as part of that I produced an animation and a video that showed the modifiers sort of being used in an animated way, which I've done for a number of my other tools as well. And in that video I sort of have all of the different individual letters of DJH GeoNode assets appear as different models that use a bunch of the different modifiers that come in the geometry node assets library, and then in the animation I sort of call out which ones are being used for which thing to both give an idea of what's possible with the modifier and sort of show what can be automated or what the tools can assist with and make things easier. Anyway, a lot of people have asked, both on that video and some of the previous videos that use a similar style, how I make those animations. So today I'm going to try to break down sort of how I did that. So I don't exactly know where to start. I guess one place I could start just by sort of giving some stats about the animation that could be interesting to know. So I decided to make an animation at some point when I had pretty much finished packaging up all of the new things I wanted to include in the geometry node assets. So I've been working on that for several months really. Just from time to time I have an idea for something new, or I need something new, and I make a new tool that I think is useful, and that gets added into the library. But at some point I have to wrap that up, polish it all up, make icons, stuff like that, and decide what's finally going in the update. Then once I had all of that ready, and once I knew what the new things that were going to be included in the update were, I decided I was going to make an animation, and I wanted to feature in the animation the new nodes a lot because they're new, but also to show a lot of the old nodes and what's possible with the set as a whole. The animation, to build it, took me one long day. I probably worked on it for, 14, 16 hours that one day. And then the next day, a couple hours rendering it, with changing some lighting, tweaking the materials, render settings. But the animation itself was pretty much done in one day. But it was a long day getting done. It was also, I was sort of rushing it. I could have taken longer, done it over multiple days, except I wanted to get it out while the sale was going on Blender Market, which was sort of the impetus to get the update actually wrapped up and packaged and all the documentation updated and stuff. Updating things is actually a lot of work, which is to be expected, I guess, but sort of annoying at the same time. Anyway, that's sort of the timeline you're looking at. I feel like that's actually pretty fast for the amount of stuff I'm able to fit in here. But just so you have a concept of the time that I put into it and stuff like that. Some of the other ones I've done have taken longer, so it's also the result of having done several before. I knew what to expect. When I first started working on it, I just came in this file and I started trying to build some stuff, simple things that I thought could show off what the new things that were possible with the modifier. And I forget, I think I imported, so this building is from some other things I've been working on, the parts to this sort of building thing. So I imported some assets from some stuff, other things I've been working on, and I was trying to make some things with that. And it wasn't too long into it that I got the idea, the concept for the whole video, which was to have the models that were built throughout the animation be the letters of the text. And that, I thought that would have a cooler reveal at the end if you could then pop back and you saw the words appear. And maybe people didn't realize right away what the shapes that were being created were, and then it was sort of a cool reveal. I think I spoiled that by showing the text in the thumbnail potentially, but anyway, that was sort of the idea. The very first thing I did was I put the music in. So if you go to your video sequencer, you can add in some audio, and I actually edited the audio to cut out the beginning, because the beginning's quiet for a long time. So if we drag this out, you can see that this is all really quiet, and then about here the music kind of picks up a bit, and I wanted to skip that beginning part to sort of build the speed of it up faster. So this waveform right about here is where we start, I think. and then I lined up the beat of the music so that you couldn't tell that so this is the very beginning of the song. I do like, I don't know, would that be a bar, like 1 bar of that or whatever, and then I skip ahead a little bit. But then I laid that all out, and then I put in markers where I wanted cuts to be. So, because I wanted the animation to be synced to the music, and you sort of have to plan that ahead if you're going to do it. So I put in markers where all the cuts should happen, and that gave me a window for each animation of the letter appearing and the modifiers being described, that it was like it had a start and an end time that I had to have that animation happen in. Then on the camera, I parented it to an empty. So I didn't want to worry about animating the camera initially. In some of the previous trailers I've done, I've just rotated the camera around a point, and as the camera rotates around, I revealed things. That was cool, but I wanted to do something different, so I just wasn't doing the same thing every single time. So I decided I would do hard cuts, and I thought that worked well with this track of music. So then I parented the camera to this empty, and the reason for that was I could move the empty around, and it's animated with constant keyframes. So the here, so there's no interpolation. It's just once it hits the next keyframe, it cuts to that position. And then on all of the markers, I just moved that object somewhere else and inserted keyframe. I started at the beginning and did the whole animation for like the first letter, and then as I moved to the next section of the music, I would move it and add the keyframe. So this animation would be very difficult to edit if I had decided I wanted to go back and change something. So I try to make sure I'm pretty happy with each the previous part of the animation before I go on to the next one, because the way I build it, it allows me to build it fast, but it's not easy to edit. Because the way I do it is there's actually a script that toggles collections on and off, so I'll get into that in a minute. Anyway, so that was the hard cut. It changed the perspective of the camera, and I can scale it to move the camera in and out, so the scale's animated as well. But the camera itself didn't have any animation. And then at the very end, part of what I did that second day was on every cut of the camera, I just put in a very subtle push in or pull out or pan on the camera itself. So there's 2 animations for the camera. The one animates the empty moving around. The empty will pop to a new position and then sit there for the whole duration of that section of the music between beats. And then the camera itself, the child of the empty, has subtle linear animations on it. You can see that here. So there's a keyframe on the marker and right after the marker for a sudden cut, and then there'll be some linear subtle animation to push the camera in or whatever. Let's turn this off, or this one here. So we can see the empty just sits there, and then it pops somewhere else. Pop, that's a cut, basically. I did have to do one sort of hack for that, which was that I turned motion blur on. And so I actually animated the shutter on the motion blur on the markers down to 0, because otherwise when there was the cut, since it's not an actual cut, the camera actually moves very rapidly to another location. You got huge motion blur on the cuts essentially. So if we jump to a marker here, you'll see that the shutter on the cut itself, the shutter goes to 0 and then back to 0.1. So it's a very subtle motion blur, but it softens some of the things moving, I thought, so I turned it on. Probably would have been easier just to turn it off, but so anyway, but the empty cuts, it just teleports to a new location and different rotation, different scale, and then the camera is animated here backing away from that empty a little bit or whatever. So that's how I did the camera. The camera and the music, animating that was sort of the first part. I did model all of these letters before I started any animation, so I just built the final result sort of, and then sort of took it all, I removed it all and then animated it appearing in some way. Then for each letter, for things I want to appear or not, because in some cases I want to show an object with certain modifiers applied and then change it with different modifiers applied. If you animate parameters on modifiers, then it causes the modifier to be reevaluated every frame, and that can be slow if you have a lot of modifiers. So what I found was actually faster in a lot of cases and more flexible was to just make duplicates of the objects and then swap which object was shown. And so the way I do that is I have this script here. It's a simple script. It's actually, it's on my Discord server. I shared it at one point. I'm happy to share it with anyone, or you can just copy it down. But basically what it does is if you have a collection that's named with a range of numbers, so this one's 0 to 372, well, that's referring to frames. And then if you run this script, on every change of the frame, when the playhead moves, it will evaluate all of the collections and see if it has a numbered range like that. And if it does, it will turn the collection on if the current frame is included in the range, and it will turn the collection off if the current frame is not included in the range. So you can see here, 0 to 372, all of these objects should be visible. And then if we go here to 362, you can see it's still on, but then if we go 10 more frames, all of this here disappears after that. So that's how I'm able to animate different modifiers being applied in different ways for objects where it would be problematic to actually animate the values. Then as far as the text goes, this is a modifier, a node group. You give it a string, so you can name this whatever you want. And then whatever text you type in here, that will be the callout that's shown in the scene. And then it's assigned materials, and the text is generated by the geometry node asset. And then you give it a start frame and an end frame. This is kind of annoying. I wish this was keyframed instead, because it makes it harder to change the timing of it, because you have to select it. You can't just like edit. This is part of why this animation would be impossible to retime or go back and make changes to once you complete the whole thing, is because even if you move all your keyframes, like if you select the second half of all of your keyframes and you move them, 30 frames further down or whatever, well, then you'd have to edit all of these values. So I'm not a huge fan of that. I need to think if there's a way I could keyframe these start and ends in some way that would make it easier to edit. Anyway, but then in the geometry node asset, it takes the current frame and compares it to those start and end frames, and then it will actually create a fade in and fade out value from that. So I do some math to figure out if we're between like the start frame and the start frame plus, I think it's like 10 frames or something. Or I guess it's the frame. You can change how long it takes. So from frame 2 to frame 22 is going to be the fade in, and then from frame 60 to frame 80 is going to be the fade out, essentially. And then for it appearing, what I do is I just have I shorten the string length. So if you have the whole wall template is, I don't know, like 14 characters or something, then at frame 2 it'll show 0 of those characters, and at frame 12 it would show half of them, so like 6 or whatever, and it just shows more characters. And then for the fading out animation, what I do is I just delete a random percentage of the geometry. So I delete faces at just random, and the probability is a 1 to 0 fade over time, basically. So that's how I did it for the sort of callouts for the geometry node assets. For the strands animation, I had a different animation. I forget what I did exactly, but it involved like scaling and drawing lines and things. It was a little more complicated. But that allows me to, once I have that done, and that it's like an animated node group essentially, then it makes it really easy for all of the different text callouts to be consistent and have the same style, work in the same way, and it's really fast to copy them. I don't have to animate any of those parameters. I just have to set the start and the end frame, which, like I said, has its own problem. But yeah, that's how the text works. These first ones, so then I made some sort of generic animation node groups. And the first one I called, that's the wrong name, it's called appear, animated appear, and what it does is it just undeletes. It's sort of the reverse of what I do when I make the text fade out, where I change the probability of a delete faces node. I just do the inverse here, or I do it both on the fade in and the fade out. So initially everything's deleted, and then it sort of undeletes when it fades in, and then it's there while it's visible, and then at the end it deletes the faces based on a random probability again until they fade out. So that's how all of those work. Then here on, if I want to show the geometry itself, so like where the edges and vertices are, I made a node group called visualize mesh. It just uses my debug draw line and draw point modifiers internally. So I just put several of those together to draw a mesh, so that you could see where the vertices and faces are. And then this is actually just animated. I made a duplicate of the finished wall, and I removed all the modifiers from it, and then I just animated shape keys to change the shape of the face, to sort of show that you can edit the, well, and actually it's a linked duplicate too, I think. So the actual, once the actual wall appears, it actually has the same shape keys on it being animated, and so you see the wall itself changing size. As far as like tracking text, so this text moves up with the wall, I just hand animated that. So I go back until it starts to move. So on this frame right here, you see the outline of the plane starts to move. So I put a keyframe where I have the text there, and then I just go forward until it stops moving, or it changes direction, and I'll put a keyframe. I just pull up the text until I put it where I think is approximately the same position, and I put in a keyframe there. There are multiple ways you could do that, but I thought it was close enough to just eyeball it and animate it by hand for that. Another one I use a lot is this next one here, where I show curves. So on the curves, I actually made the modifier a little bit fancier. You can choose the color of the line and adjust the radius and stuff. And a lot of these I actually, when I fade out the curve, or I have those curve lines disappear from the render, I actually animate this radius going from whatever it is down to 0 as well. It's sort of, I found that made the lines pop in and out less, and more sort of, I don't know, it made the disappearing of those lines feel smoother. And then I have an animated trim modifier. It works the same way. You give it a start and an end frame, transition duration, and then you can randomize for each element in the object. So in this case, all the different splines. Should that start and end time be at exactly the same time for all of them, or should some of them start sooner or later, and that's controlled by this random value? So it works the same way. It calculates fade in and fade out values from 0 to 1 basically, and then it uses those values to blend between different things. So it's just using some map ranges and stuff with the scene time to get the current frame and compare it to those start and end times. And then I just take the curve and I'm going to trim it. So if you use a trim curve, you can change the length of a curve. And you can do it by factor, so 0 to 1 or 1 to 0. And so just by doing that, if you plug those, I guess this was this way. if you plug those into those animated factors for the fade in and fade out, then the result you get is the lines appearing and disappearing like that. And then I just did the same on the actual lines that instance on curves was being run on. So they get a similar, I think the timing's slightly different. I also have where you can reverse it. But so then as the same thing's being happened here, these curves are getting trimmed in an animated way, and then as they change size, the instances being spawned on them change size, and they sort of appear nicely like that. Same for these logs, they're also instance on curves. And then for the roof here, I use scatter. So again, just all of these animation modifiers. So this animated appear, visualize the mesh. I made, this one has this sort of animation fall, which was a modified version of the appear that also animated the position of each instance to come down at the same time. You can see they start 1 meter up and scale to 0, and then as they appear, they drop down into place. But same concept again, start an in-frame, number of frames, and a random for each different mesh island, and then that creates fade in and fade outs between 0 and 1 values that you can use to animate different properties like the position or the scale. So then we cut. It is just sort of the same thing over and over again, trying to do different ones. So the same text, animated text thing. Again, you got the modifiers here. So if I had if I was going to animate this, sort of what I would do is I would have this object here. So I would make a copy of it, and I would get rid of the stairs, because in this case I just want to show it. And then I would add this debug, what did I call it? So sometimes, there it is. I don't know why that happens sometimes. So then I would pop that on there so you can see it, and I might move it up or something. And then once you have that visual on there, then you could add the animation. So this should have it's a curve, so it should use the trim animation, and then that should go above the visualization. And then I would just look at what frame I had here. I can copy that into the start, and then I could go somewhere else where I wanted it to end. I could copy that into the end, and then if we hide everything else, then you can see we have this animated curve. And so then it's just a matter of getting the timing right, however you want it to appear. And this whole time I would be playing it in the viewport, looking from the camera point of view, listening to music, trying to make sure all of that worked well, and that the animation was flowing, that the speed of everything appearing and disappearing. It's easy sometimes to make things too fast or too slow, so you always have to go back and watch it in context. So you go back to the previous one. Let's unhide all of this again. Watch it, see if it felt right. It's hard too sometimes because it doesn't always play back at full speed. You can see I'm getting about half of the frames that I would if it was fully rendered. But you can change your timing here, your playback, to sync to audio, and so that will, it makes the playback a little bit worse. You get fewer frames than you would otherwise, but it keeps it in sync with the sound more or less. So even though I'm only getting half of the frames, I'm getting the frames at the correct times. So that way I can, by playing it a few times, get a good sense of whether or not it's working well with the animation, just in the viewport, which is good. Also, shaders are really slow. If you turn off normal maps on all of your shaders, the viewport's way faster, which is weird. I've also, on this, I've turned on ray tracing and stuff now. I did that at the very end. So turning off ray tracing, turning off motion blur, tweaking, the render settings can help get some more frames sometimes. In this case, I don't think the rendering's what's causing the slowdown. It's actually the modifiers being evaluated. So anyway. But I got sidetracked there. What I was saying was that when making the animation, seeing the whole animation is key. So constantly have to go back and watch the whole cut in this case. So from this cut to the next cut, does the animation move at a nice speed? Is it too fast? Is it too slow? If I jump ahead here, so this one was initially terrible because I actually have too much going on here. So there was like a curve, and there was deform match curve with the rocks on that curve, and then was a face here, and I actually fill the face with the curve fill boundary and the solidify, and then there was another curve when I used set material, and then this was another curve which was using the curve sweep node, and I forget, it seems like there was something else in here too. Anyway, there was so much text in it that you couldn't read it all in the amount of time that you had. So when I went back through it, I just decided to delete several of the labels. So rather than showing everything that was happening, because that was just too much, I picked a fewer number of things to show, because this was too fast initially. Or it was the same speed, but it felt too fast because there was so much text appearing. Same with this one. I initially had these elements appearing sort of one by one. So first the base was drawn, and then the posts, and then the rails, and then the pickets. But what that meant was by the time you got to the pickets, it was on screen for like half a second, and then it disappeared, and you didn't have time to really appreciate the fact that it was there. So I had to come back and retime this shot so that all of the elements appeared faster, so you had more time to look at it, basically. And so again, that's just a matter of playing it back, seeing how it looked, and deciding what to change about it, basically. So on things like this, I just have the modifier here, and then I keyframe different properties on it. So I do that to demonstrate how it works in a lot of cases. So in this one, it's the density is animated to make it appear. On this one, it's just animated with the trim, but on this one, the curve's actually segmented into sections to make sort of the dash, and with the smooth caps and stuff. So in that case, I animate different parameters that I think will show off what's happening with that modifier the best. This wasn't my favorite shot in the whole thing. Some of the letters, it was hard to think of what you could make that would fit the shape well. And I was also, there were two limitations. One was it had to make the shape of the letter, so that really constrained the type of thing you could make a lot. And then two, I wanted to show all of the modifiers, so it was sort of like, which modifiers have I used, which ones haven't I used. So this one, not the most interesting of the models, but I did want to show off the new smooth capped ends thing, so that was why that one was in there. This was kind of a repeat, the build walls, but I wanted to be able to show the face project and stuff, which I didn't in the first one. The first building sort of thing was on the letter D, and it was focused on using the instance on curves to clean up the corners, sort of, which was a new thing I had tried. The other key thing that's sort of a key part of the build tools is being able to put like windows and stuff in and have them cut holes in the wall. So I wanted to show that again, just because it's a key part of the tools. So this one here, this is one of the cases where animating this all is very difficult. So in this case, if we watch the collections here, you'll actually see the collections all changing. Where are we at? It's 1500. So let's just go back here. So you can see here we're at 1400. And then as we play, it's gonna, which collections are active are being animated and toggled. And really I'm just animating, trying to use different modifiers, animate whichever property makes sort of the biggest visual change or shows what it's doing off in the best way. And then, yeah, like I said, the cuts were all sort of predetermined. That was the very first thing I did, was went through and mark where the cuts needed to happen, and then I animated the whole thing in order. So once I got, this shot happy the way I liked it, if, say, this was where the cut was, I would just move this off somewhere else and insert a keyframe, at the marker, and then I didn't have to decide right away if that was the actual angle or not, but it gave you the timing of it cutting away to the next letter. So, yeah, I'm sure I haven't talked about everything, but I'm not sure what else to say about it, really. Then at the end, it was extremely slow to show all of this at once, so I actually made a duplicate of it all and applied all of the modifiers when the whole thing appears at the end. Wait, didn't I? I thought I did that. Oh, no, I didn't apply them, but I made a copy of it and I deleted all of the animation off of the modifiers. Because when you animate the modifier, it reevaluates at every frame. And so once you have, 50 or 100 different modifiers being evaluated every frame because they're visible and they're keyframed, then it makes playback really slow. I was getting like a couple frames a second, I think. But then this all appears. There was some. I actually changed the color of the floor here and make it darker just so that this stuff stands out more. Then for sort of the fully rendered 3D letters just disappear all in one frame. But right before they disappear, the simple text version of DJH GeoNode assets is using the animated appear animation to sort of fade in behind it. So it actually worked out. It sort of hid that pretty well. You see the white letters appearing, changing how it looks a little bit, and then as that finishes, the collection pops out. It just disappears in one frame. But when you play it back at full speed, it didn't really look like the 3D version of the letters just disappeared because of the timing of the appear happening at the same time. These are just, I imported images as planes and added a simple geometry nodes to have a grid bevel the corners of it. So you get rounded corners, and then fill that and give it a gray color. The gray is sampled the dark gray color from the UI, basically, because I wanted these to look sort of like the icons in your asset library view. And then these are images with, these are the icon images just imported as planes with transparency, and they're just placed slightly above it. And then these are, again, just using the appear, so the faces are undeleted and then deleted again on the timing. Getting the timing on all of these was kind of annoying because they all have to be offset by like one frame starting in, because I didn't want them to all appear at once. I felt like it looked better if these appeared one after the other, and so I had to go through and change. I actually wrote a script to change the timing on the selection by one for each of them. Yeah. And then the whole thing I just rendered out to JPEG images, and then I imported it into another file where I did the edit of the whole video, because I also afterwards talked about the new modifiers and stuff. But yeah, I think that's basically it. If you have more questions about things in particular, I'd be happy to talk about other things about it. But off the top of my head, I think that pretty much covers how I made this animation. So yeah, a little bit different sort of video from what I usually do, but hopefully it was very interesting and gave you a good idea of how I make this kind of animation. Yeah. If you have any questions, let me know. Feel free to join my Discord server. There's a link for that in the description. If you're interested in about any of my tools or anything like that, check out my website. Link for that's also in the description. And You can find any of my tools on Blender Market or Gumroad. But yeah, I think that's all I've got for this one. Thanks for watching.